Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back here to the full story on WYAB 103.9 on this now Tuesday morning of the week as we continue rolling on. And the big story I want to talk about this morning um, is the peace talks that Ukraine and the United States are now having in um, in Saudi Arabia, which has weirdly been the place where they've been. That's also the United States met with Russia just earlier in the year, and this is all going on as there have been massive drone strikes in Moscow. So trying to put pressure on Russia in that regard. We'll talk about that. What's going on in Saudi Arabia? Obviously, we've been covering the Ukrainian conflict quite heavily here, as well as, of course, the big spat between. I don't even want to really call it a spat. It's really not even a spat. It's really just Zelensky making a fool of himself in the White House, and then Donald Trump calling him on it, and then Zelensky having to come back to grovel back to Donald Trump in the letter that he mentioned in his State of the Union speech that we covered. And obviously, Trump is moving forward. No sign yet on the minerals deal, even though the Ukrainians said they were willing to sign it. But they're proposing potentially a limited ceasefire in that regard. So we'll look at that. Also looking at the drone strikes that are happening right now in Russia. We got some video for that for you guys. The ones that are watching on the live stream, we have the actual video of that, which should be pretty good. Um, and then we're going to talk about the stock market a little bit. We haven't talked about the stock market in a while, but obviously the markets have been kind of crazy swings in the market with the announcement of tariffs, with how that could affect the economy. We've talked about the tariffs quite a bit here, but we haven't talked about the actual effects on the economy, even though the tariffs haven't gone into full force. Just the mention of them, the potentiality of them, what that has, how that can affect the market, and how it's affecting the market right now. And then, if we have time, I want to talk a little bit about the taking down of a monument in D.C., except this time it's not really a monument. It's the big Black Lives Matter thing that was on the street. If you can remember that, they painted the big yellow Black Lives Matter right there, not about a block, I guess, from the White House. If I can, if I got my if I got my geography correct, yeah, it's still there. It won't be much longer. But it's just been sitting there ever since the whole protest that they had there, which is kind of funny to have a Black Lives Matter protest in a city that is majority black, but whatever. Especially when you run it's almost like that is a crazy. If you got a majority black city that's run by a majority of black people, for you to have a protest about Black Lives Matter and about how you're oppressed, that's it's just a little weird if you run the city yourself. It's like, well, I mean, don't you run the city? Now DC, in all fairness, is not like most cities in that it's not completely autonomous. Or I guess no city is really autonomous, but they have much less autonomy than most cities because their laws and governance and everything has to mostly go through Congress, and Congress runs a lot of what goes on in the city, or at least they have veto power over it. And of course, now with Republicans being in control of the House and the Senate, they can start to correct them. It is our nation's capital, after all. That's why it is a federal enclave. It is the reason you have that, right? Is you don't necessarily want this city that can just run itself, and it's supposed to be our nation's capital. Because the nation's capital, you want to make sure is safe. It's pretty. It's a place that the world can look to, as a shining hill, right? As to put on what Ronald Reagan talks about, because he meant that as a country as a whole. But you need your capital city to look and be safe, as well as look professional, look an actual like a capital. And of course, not only that, but make sure people are safe when visiting. not just diplomats and things like that, but people in the country when they come to see their capital. They shouldn't be disgusted when they see their capital, and it's outside of a few places they haven't done the best with that, and things like seeing things like this big yellow Black Lives Matter on the road doesn't help things for people coming there. So hopefully, like I said, starting to get back to common sense in DC, and that's common sense in DC as a whole, right? That's what Donald Trump is wanting to bring in. As I said at the beginning, this was supposed to be the return of common sense and the return of unabashed conservatism, or just, hey, here's how it's going to be, deal with it. We got the votes, right? We've been dealing with you for 12 of the last 16 years, and we're tired of trying to grovel to you when you never groveled to us or tried to work with us. And so this is how it's going to be. The American people have spoken, and that's exactly what he's doing. And like I said, there's no apologies, no holding back whatsoever. But those are hopefully what we can all talk about this morning. If you want to call in during any of the breaks, number 601-879-0002. Of course, like I said, we are running live on YouTube and Rumble as well, so you can leave comments there. As like I said, as well as if you call during the break, we can talk live on those platforms, and we can have a much more freer conversation. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and take that first break, that early first break that we like to take before we get into our main story, which is going to be the peace talks in Ukraine. Well, the peace talks in Saudi Arabia on Ukraine. Again, if you want to call in during the break, number 601-879-0002. Keep it tuned to the full story on WYAB 103.9. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back here to the full story on WYAB 103.9 as we continue on. And like I said, we've been covering the Ukrainian war quite often, quite a bit. As we try to cover mostly international news, or it's international, but it affects America quite a bit, more so than most people would like. But because one thing of us spending so much money there is that we can pretty much direct how the ending of this thing can happen, and really direct the ending to happen. Because we have given so much money over to Ukraine. Like I said, about 40% of all of their war effort has come from us. And with us saying we're going to withhold withhold the military aid to that, if they lose 40% of their money and equipment, that's pretty hard to continue on. So now, high stakes talks between senior delegations from Ukraine and the United States on how to end Kyiv's 3-year war with Moscow opened in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday after hours of negotiations. So this happened this happens hours after Russian air defenses shot down 337 Ukrainian drones over Russia. 2 people were killed and 19 were injured, including 3 children in the massive drone attack that spanned 10 Russian regions. No large-scale damage, however, was reported. So they shot down 337 drones, which gave very little damage, which makes me wonder, is that just posturing because someone had to pay for those 337 drones? I get the kind of the I guess the emotional or the mind games that may play with Russian citizens, like, hey, these are Ukrainian drones in our country, right? So it's like, hey, this makes them nervous or try to make them nervous. But if they shoot down all 300, if they shoot down 337, I don't know how many of them total there were, but if they shoot down 337 of them, and no large-scale damage happens, it's like, well, was that really the best use of those drones, or would those have been better used back on the battlefield in your country and defending your country? I don't know. But again, especially when other people are paying for those drones and you're not paying for them, it's a little bit of a nerve-wracking thing, because those things aren't cheap, right? We're not talking cheap drones when they talk about these 337. That's probably close to $1 million right there, just right down the drain, if not more. So you just imagine, it's like, hey, maybe people are thinking maybe that wasn't the best. Maybe that's what's the best use of them. But again, that's not to discount the fact that that has some kind of emotional impact, or trying to make the Russian citizens scared, or try to make the Russian citizens try to push their government. But obviously they don't know what Russians are, because Russians don't give a crap what their citizens think. They'll do whatever. They're Russia. That's what they do. The people of Russia cannot like the war all they want. It's not going to stop. And if you want to disagree with it, well, they'll just conscript you and send you to the front lines. So, like I said, maybe in a democratically elected country, that would work, but not in a place like Russia. So in the Red Sea port of Jeddah, which is in Saudi Arabia, like I said, journalists briefly entered a room where senior Ukrainian delegation met with Americans' top diplomats for talks on ending Europe's biggest conflict since World War II. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was asked what his expectations for the meeting were, and he gave a thumbs up and replied, good. What else would he say? Ukrainian officials, including the country's top diplomat and defense chief, sat without expression at a table across from the meeting. Got underway at a luxury hotel. There was no immediate comment from Ukrainian or U.S. officials on the drone attack. However, Ukrainian presidential aide Andriy Yermak commented to reporters that the most important thing was how to achieve a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. He said security guarantees were important to prevent Russia from invading again in the future in 2014, which was when Russia seized Crimea from Ukraine. And again, nothing happened then. That's the craziest thing. It's how all of a sudden, the Democrats were just fine with Russia invading Ukraine, right? They did it when in a couple weeks ago. We kind of went through the history of that, how they invaded, of course, Crimea without opposition, didn't start a war. They just took it over. Then they in the same region here, the Donbass region, in the eastern part of Ukraine, they've been in there before, which caused a conflict, but we didn't get involved. And only after this one, only when Biden was president, did we start sending billions and billions of dollars, and starting to get involved. And you just wonder, right? One can wonder, I would say, that no, even President Obama didn't do anything when this happened, when Russia was doing the same thing with Ukraine, and then all of a sudden we know that there are connections between the Biden family and contracts in Ukraine, the Ukrainian power companies. Hunter Biden sitting on the board of one of them. The good old Hunter Biden who likes to do blow off hookers' stomachs. That Hunter Biden. It makes you wonder, right? Is why all of a sudden did Democrats care? They didn't care when they did it the first time under Obama, and Obama didn't do anything. Of course, there were no invasions under Donald Trump, and then they invade again under Biden, and all of a sudden we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars, and everybody has to wear Ukrainian flags. It's like, what's going on here? Something's a little fishy about that. And of course, when Donald Trump asked about it during his administration, they tried to impeach him. How dare he ask on such things? And I don't know if of course, Joe Biden pre-pardoned his son for any crimes or wrongdoings that ever could have happened, right? Which I've talked about needs to be tested. That pardoning power needs to be tested. But I would hope that one of the things while we're negotiating this with Ukraine is that, hey, you have to give us all your records you have on the Bidens, everything you got on them. If you want us to help you out, we're going to need this information, and you can't hide it any longer. I would hope that's part of it, just so the American people can know or get some truth of why their tax dollars just all of a sudden had to be spent on Ukraine. We didn't care the first time it happened. First two times it happens, I should say. There was Crimea and Donbass. And all of a sudden, when Biden gets in there, we all of a sudden have to spend hundreds of billions of dollars. Just interestingly enough, just something to put out there. A big question mark for you, if you will, of why that was on there. And I hope, like I said, maybe through these talks we can finally get to that. So Saudi Arabia's, going back to the meeting, Saudi Arabia's foreign minister was on hand for the talks as American, Saudi, and Ukrainian flags stood in the background. However, the official did not answer any of the questions from reporters. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said the United States will inform Russia about the results of the Jeddah talks, which he described as normal practice. And this is something that's interesting because just overall, talks are opening. Right? This never would have happened under the Democrats of Kamala Harris, because they have some kind of backroom deal to keep this thing going in perpetuity, right? With the military-industrial complex, they have something going on with that. But the fact is that both sides now are engaging in talks. They're not engaging in talks with each other just yet, but the United States is brokering a deal between both of them. That's something that just wasn't going to happen under the Democrats, right? That's something it was never going to happen. It wasn't even talked about. Peace was never talked about by the Democrats leading up to this. It was never discussed about how we can come to an end of the war. It's just that we got to support Ukraine. We got to support Ukraine. Never about, well, how can we support peace? Because that's really what we should be supporting, right? Is supporting peace. Now, again, my grand scheme of things is it never should have been involved to begin with, and that's a European problem. But now that we are involved, and we are, as I've talked about, and conservative estimates, at least $200 billion in. Donald Trump puts the $350 billion number out there, but just in the last couple of years, I know for a fact $200 billion we've been involved. Then we need to get to a peace deal. And Donald Trump, like you said, he promised that he would have an ending to this, and they have been working hard. Again, they've only been in office now, not quite 2 months, and we're already talking about peace talks. And he hasn't even been in power 2 months yet. That's how quickly things are. That's pretty quick in a war that's been going on for what, 4 years. So, and I mean, I guess even longer than that if you want to count going all the way back to Crimea. So it's just interesting to think, right, that how fast things have been moving. So the talks offer an opportunity for Kyiv officials to repair Ukraine's relationship with the Trump administration after an unprecedented argument erupted during President Vladimir Zelensky's February 28th visit to the White House. Critically, Ukraine needs to persuade Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine needs to persuade Ukraine. Ukraine needs to persuade Washington to end the subsequent U.S. suspension of military aid and some intelligence sharing. U.S. officials have said that positive talks in Jeddah could mean it may be only a short suspension. So again, you do what we say, we'll support it until the end of the war, and we'll support that, but you'll do it on a timeline. This is not going to be forever. This is only going to be until we can get to the end mark, right? That's the only reason we have to support them a little bit further, is in order, because Ukraine knows this. If we just pull out, if Ukraine doesn't want to heed to what we want, then Donald Trump just pulls out. He shows how quickly he'll do it. And if we pull out, they lose 40% of all their funding and equipment and military supplies, then they are not in a good spot. And the EU, or Europe as a whole, does not have the resources to make up for that. They're already tapped out enough, and their people are already tired of how much money they're giving, right? We've talked about that in Germany, as there's been conservatives elected in places like Germany and Italy, and France is also their I say conservative, I mean conservative-like parties. Again, conservatism means different things in Europe than it does here. But I'm going to say parties that are more nationalist, more concerned about their own internal affairs, and those they've been getting more and more of those elected, and that's something their leaders are taking heed, because they're starting to lose power because of their support of Ukraine, and they're in Europe, right? They're actually in Europe, and if I'm a European citizen, I can understand supporting Ukraine a little bit more, just because I don't want Russia coming after me, and it seems like it's a great way to try to fend that off. But even their people are like, hey, what are we doing here? Our people are hurting on the streets. We get all these migrants, very similar issues to the United States on a smaller scale and on a different type of scale. And so they've been losing. Those globalists in those countries have been losing elections. And we've been covering those elections here on the show. And so that's causing them to have to come back a little bit. And they know that if the United States pulls out, not only do they not have the money, but even if they did, it'd be a huge, huge stretch. And then the people of their own country don't want to do that, right? They would lose their jobs. And what do politicians care more about anything else? I don't care where the politician is keeping their job, right? For as long as they can, and keeping their hand on power as long as they can. And this, as long as if Ukraine starts threatening that for them, they also may start pulling out. So Ukraine is right now, the outlook for them is not great, because they absolutely cannot get through without the United States. They need every single dollar from the United States to keep going, and that's why they have to. They don't we'll talk with them, see what they want, and they keep saying security guarantees. I don't know what they mean by that. Because if they're talking about boots on the ground or troops or stationing troops in Ukraine, that's just not going to happen. That's a straight up no-go. However, this goes back to now the minerals rights deal. So the mineral rights deal, which was supposed to be the agreement with the United States, which again was to give the United States access to Ukraine's uh, rare earth minerals that Zelensky was there in the White House to sign, and that he screwed the pooch on that one. That is still not been signed. However, on the plane to Jeddah, Rubio said the U.S. delegation would may sign the deal in that time, but they are not going to. They are not going to really get into detail about specific measures to secure an end to the 3-year deal. But again, the security guarantee that you need is in that deal. That's the security guarantee. I've talked about that before, and that's what they need to. That's what they need to sign to have any kind of security measures. Because, you know, again, you look at our military and what's happened over the last 70 years. You know, we still have troops in Germany, right? We still have troops in Japan. We still have troops in Korea. Um, Meanwhile, in the last few years, we've had an invasion on our southern border, and it's like, what exactly now? And now they want, and now they want troops in Ukraine, and we have troops in Poland as well. We have with a strong ally there. I will say that Donald Trump did see that from the get go, and that's how you keep Russia at bay. Is things like that. Is having alliances with people like Poland. And it was funny because it was President Obama that they got rid of. It was called Fifth Corps or V Corps, which was a whole Army corps that was based in Europe, and then Obama got rid of it, saying, "Hey, we don't need it." And it was Trump that reorganized it. Right? He said, "No, I don't think we need to get rid of our corps in Europe." And he reorganized V Corps back in Europe, and to have a a large military element available in Europe, and that goes to deterrence, right? Um, and so that was something that Donald Trump did, right? And like I said, that's what's crazy to me is that the Democrats were getting out of Europe; they didn't want to do anything in Europe, and then just real crazy 180 with President Biden and them coming to like this heavy defense. Now we want to do everything in Europe. We want to spend all these hundreds of billions of dollars in Europe, just out of nowhere. But um, Rubio told reporters who were accompanying him about the meeting, "quote I'm not going to set any conditions on what they have to or need to do. I think we want to listen to see how far they're willing to go and then compare that to what the Russians want and see how far apart we truly are." Rubio said the rare earths and critical minerals deal could be signed during the meeting, but stressed it was not a precondition to the United States for the United States to move ahead with discussions with either Ukraine or the Russians. He said it may, in fact, make more sense to take some time to negotiate the precise details of the agreement, which is now a broad memorandum of understanding that leaves out many specifics. Um, which I guess is not a bad idea, right? Let's get down to specifics, the brass tacks of that agreement, because Ukraine needs, for their sake, they should want that because that's their security guarantee that they want. Now, Zelensky was there in Saudi Arabia. However, he landed a few hours difference in Saudi Arabia, and they did not meet each other. Now, I'm going to go ahead and take another break right here. When we get back, I want to talk about the Kremlin's response to that. We have a couple more facts I want to cover on this, and then I want to go into some of the stock market things and world markets as far as the tariffs go. If you want to call in during the break, number 601-879-0002. Keep it tuned to the full story on WYAB 103.9. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back here to the full story on WYAB 103.9 as we continue on. And a couple more things I want to talk about on the Ukrainian issue before we get into the stock market. So the Kremlin, in regards to this, has not publicly offered, that's Russia, Kremlin, has not publicly offered any concessions. Russia said it's ready to cease hostilities on condition that Ukraine drops its bid to join NATO and recognize regions that Moscow occupies as Russian, or at least separate territories. As Russia has captured nearly a fifth of Ukraine's territory since the war began. Russian forces have held the battlefield momentum. It seems like lately, even though again it's always back and forth. We never really get a true thing. Whenever it's convenient, Russia has momentum, and then whenever it's convenient, Ukraine has momentum. I never really know has momentum. All we do know is that Russia occupies 1/5 of the country. Though again, it's been according to Ukrainian sources a high cost to Russians with the 600-mile front line, especially in the Donetsk region, in the Donbass region, all that area. So most of Ukraine drones, like I said, that fired overnight were shot down. As you heard a little bit about there, killed now 3 people. But 70 of those drones were in Moscow, which was the biggest single attack on Moscow so far in the war. But again, if the effectiveness is they all get shot down, does that really further your cause? I mean, obviously it's just a posture move. It has no actual military benefit. Also, of course, targeting civilian buildings is not the best way to get you in the best graces of of the international people, I should say. Not the best way to do it. So outside of the attacks, Ukrainian officials told the Associated Press yesterday that they will propose a ceasefire covering the Black Sea, which would bring safer shipping as well as long-range missile strikes that have hit civilians in Ukraine and the release of prisoners. The officials, who spoke on the condition of anonymity because they are not authorized to speak publicly, because they never are, also told the Associated Press that the Ukrainian delegation is ready during the talks to sign that minerals agreement. Even though I just talked about, Rubio said, "Hey, maybe we need to get specifics first before we start signing anything." The officials discussed the confidence building measures with no further details ahead of the Ukrainian negotiating team's meeting with the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. As I mentioned earlier, Zelensky landed after Rubio and did not meet with him. However, he did meet with the kingdom's crown prince Monday evening, with the president saying that they had a detailed discussion on the steps and conditions needed to end the war and secure a reliable and lasting peace. Zelensky said online, quote, "Saudi Arabia provides a crucial platform to diplomacy, and we appreciate this." Rubio also met Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, thanking him for hosting the talks and also discussing Yemen's Houthi rebels who are threatening to restart their attacks in the Red Sea. Speaking to reporters aboard his plane before arriving, Rubio said that he and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz would take stock of Ukraine's responses in Saudi Arabia, so to see what they're trying to get. And I'm sure that he's trying to get money from Saudi Arabia, but unlike the U.S., right? The U.S. is relatively nice when we give away our money. Places like Saudi Arabia, you pay for it. They expect everything back, plus some. And it may be in the form of money. It may be in the form of military assistance to them in the future, using Ukrainian mercenaries and what have you. But places like that, you don't get their money for free, not even close. And they shouldn't be getting American money for free, but we are nothing like those countries that once you start dealing with them, you're not in a great shape, as it were. Things are not going well for you if you have to start trying to take money from Saudi Arabia, because there are a lot of things that come with those dollars. So like I said, that's all coming as the U.S. has paused its own assistance to them, and included intelligence sharing. However, White House Special Envoy Steve Witkoff said on Monday that the pause of U.S. intelligence sharing with Ukraine has not limited defense intelligence sharing. I don't know what that means. He said, "We never shut off intelligence for anything defensive that Ukraine needs." So I guess if they had information that Russia was attacking a certain place, they would still tell them, but they wouldn't tell them about things that's going on in Russia to enable them to take offensive action. I'm guessing what he's getting out for there. So the so again, this is all what's going down. Like I said, Ukraine is in a not in a great position right now. Like I said, after Zelensky's little spat with Donald Trump, that didn't set himself off well. But Donald Trump, like he said, he's willing to he's willing to sign the deal. Let's get this thing signed and let's get to peace. And if there's anybody that can do it, it's the Trump administration. Has been working tirelessly to do so. The question is, can Ukraine put aside their own wants for exactly what they need? Because you always don't get what you want, as the song goes. All right. I now want to move over to our next stories. We just have about 5 minutes or so to talk about stocks. So yesterday, there was a huge stock roll-off with stocks falling more than 1,000 points in the afternoon talks. However, it raised just a little bit to closing down 890 points, or 2.1%. And this is coming after the tariff talks with Mexico, Canada, and China. And this is also coming as the NASDAQ is already in correction mode. So one thing I've talked about before is the stock market has incredibly been inflated. Part of that is because inflation itself, right? And just based on pure inflation, it's going to increase. But if you look at the state of our economy the last few years, the stock market just did not follow it. It's like it's in its own world. While Americans were having to pay more for everything and spending less, the stock market continued to go up. And what that tells you is that there is a correction that is needed. And sometimes those corrections can be heavy. And so we're already in that mode of the stock market needs to be corrected. And then you add on to the fact that these tariffs are going to happen. That is going to send the stock market down. That's how tariffs work. There's no question about that. And Donald Trump hasn't shied away from that either. That's why I've said that tariffs in and of themselves have a hard time politically, because they take a little bit of short-term pain for long-term gain, right? That's the way tariffs work. Of course, it's going to hurt business. It is going to. There's no question about it. But the idea being is that, yes, it's going to hurt businesses now, but that's going to force businesses. The whole idea is to hurt them. That's the point of a tariff, right? The point of the tariff is to hurt the businesses in order to force them to make changes to better the country. So that means that all the stuff they're getting from China, right? All that stuff that they're getting right now, in order to avoid higher cost, then they have to invest and build factories in the United States. That takes time, right? That takes years sometimes, or it's going to take years for that to happen. But if you don't have the tariff, there is nothing incentivizing them to do it to begin with. So in the meantime, that means that goods, they're going to be subject to tariff. They're going to be more expensive. There's no doubt about it, right? Again, that's what tariffs do. It's going to make those goods more expensive. They're going to pass that cost on to the customer, you. But with the idea being that means that if things are more expensive, customers are going to be spending less, which could help inflation, mind you. But two, that's going to force these companies to move their factories back to the United States, which is then going to create jobs, which is then going to increase the economy. But that is a long term solution, right? And that's why it has to be pretty much a second term president to do something like that because now they're saying recession, 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 and we haven't had a recession since 2020. Well, we actually have, because we've had periods, 2 quarters of negative growth, but they said, oh, that's not actually a recession, because other factors didn't do it. It's like, okay, you just didn't want to call it a recession because it was politically advantageous to you not to call it a recession, whatever. But the thing is, um, they're all client. They're all. This is exactly why politicians have a hard time with tariffs, is because look, you're hurting the economy. You're hurting the economy. Look what you're doing. This is what you wanted, American people. Look, you voted this in. Yes, we did. We did vote this in. We voted in someone who can pull up the bootstraps and say, you know what, we're gonna make things a little bit more difficult right now, so that in the future, um, we have a better America. And that means it's going to be tough for a while. As Donald Trump said, we played it in his State of the Union, just hang with me, he said. Just hang with me, because it's going to happen. You just got to give it time. And so you got to put away all of this craziness that's being yelled out there by all the pundits. Oh, look what he's doing. Look what he's doing. He's hurting us. No, this is to help the country. You just got to hang with it for a while, get through it until we can start investing back in this country. All right, we have to take our last break. When we get back, we'll do This Day in History. But keep it tuned to the full story on WYAB 103.9. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back here to the full story on WYAB 103.9. As we do this day in history, we're going to run out of time here on the air, but this will continue on for the live stream. So on this day, March 11th, 1945, was one of the deadliest kamikaze attacks of World War II as it struck the U.S. fleet off the coast of Japan as part of a desperate final months of the Pacific War. The target that day was the USS Randolph, which was CV-15, an Essex-class aircraft carrier stationed at Leyte Atoll, which is a major U.S. naval base in the Western Pacific. That evening, a Japanese Yokosuka P-1Y Francis twin-engine bomber repurposed for a kamikaze suicide mission managed to slip past American defenses and crashed into the carrier's flight deck. The resulting explosion killed 25 crew members and injured over 100 more. Though the damage was severe, the USS Randolph was not sunk and was quickly repaired, allowing it to return to combat in the final months of the war. So by early 1945, Japan was suffering heavy losses, and conventional attacks against a vastly superior U.S. fleet were proving ineffective. The kamikaze, or divine wind, became a desperate military strategy where Japanese pilots would deliberately crash their planes into Allied warships in an attempt to inflict maximum damage, essentially using themselves as missiles, as guided missiles. The tactic first appeared in late 1944 during the Battle of Gulf. But by the time of the Okinawa campaign, kamikaze attacks had become a major threat, sinking or damaging dozens of U.S. ships. The attack on the USS Randolph was part of a broader wave of kamikaze strikes leading up to the Battle of Okinawa, the bloodiest battle in the Pacific. Just weeks later, thousands of kamikaze pilots would launch waves of suicide attacks in a last-ditch effort to stop the U.S. advance on Japan. And though the kamikaze attacks were terrifyingly effective at times, they failed to stop the American advance, and by August 1945, Japan had surrendered following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, bringing World War II to an end. But whenever they saw the kamikaze pilots, it was something that was definitely very fearful. All right, that's all I have for you guys today. We'll see you again tomorrow, but until then, my name is Matthew Bishop, and you've heard the full story.